Hello and welcome to my first video from the updated series of the PMP exam. This series fills in the gaps for updated information that PMI has added to the exam since the previous version that we had. So if you haven't watched the previous 45 videos that are part of my PMP exam prep series, then you need to stop and watch those videos first, and these will be the additions that you need to have on top of the other 45 videos. So these are only going to fill the gaps for any information that PMI has added to the exam. They're not going to be sufficient on their own. It's these plus the 45 videos. Now let's start with the updates. So the first thing I need to tell you is that these updates include PMI's PMBOK 7. And in PMBOK 7 there were a lot of concepts that have been added, foundational and otherwise. And this specific portion that I will have in this video right now includes concepts from that PMBOK 7. PMI expects you to know these things, but maybe there won't be any direct questions about these concepts. So how do you study? You just need to know them. You will not have direct questions on them, at least for now, for the small section that I will cover in this video. But the exam questions have been written with the expectation that you have knowledge of these. I hope that makes sense. Just because there won't be a direct question on them doesn't mean that you don't need to know them. It's based on the idea that you already know this. So they won't ask you about it, but they expect you to have that in the back of your mind. All right, let's move on. So the first thing I'd like to bring to your attention is that PMI has evolved over the years, and maybe that's why you see PMBOK 6 going to PMBOK 7 and eventually PMBOK 8. So what has changed? 50 years ago, actually 50 plus years ago, PMI started the PMP certification, and back then when we learned about project management was a set of skills and knowledge that you would pick up and learn so that you can execute on your project. And now in modern day project management, that view has changed. So we no longer think about project management being about, executing your project to the set of requirements, but instead it's about producing an output that gives you that capability or outcome that allows you to deliver value to your organization. So now PMI is a lot more value oriented than it used to be before. A lot of value these days is produced through Agile project management, which is why PMI has introduced Agile into the content of the exam. In fact, 50% of the exam will be Agile type questions. So key differentiation when it comes to roles in the traditional projects, which is what we call predictive projects, the person who sponsored the project was the project sponsor. And so that was your most important stakeholder. And the project is usually run by the PM, the project manager. And now with the introduction of Agile, we now refer to the person who drives the project from the organization as the product owner. Mind you, a lot of Agile project management is about software, it's about computerized digital products, maybe data-oriented automating systems, creating apps, creating portals, systems that use information and process information, integrate data from different sources. And so usually these are going to be applications, not a house, not a highway. So an application or a system that would have its owner, the product owner. Doesn't mean they physically own it, but they represent the organization as the person who looks out for the value that we get from that product. An example would be a CRM system, ERP system, or maybe it's the core banking system at any financial institution. But these systems usually have someone who oversees the value that we get out of it, and they decide when it's time to upgrade, enhance, add in more features based on customer requirements or their, the way they use the system, functionality, or maybe they can decide when it's time to end that product from existence. So we now talk about the product owner. And when it comes to managing the project, Agile is a collaborative way of managing projects, and so typically you expect the team to play a big role in managing the project. So there are team roles like the team lead, the scrum master, agile coach, facilitator, and so on. So these were roles that were included when we started to talk about agile. And it's important to note that traditional project management is plan-driven, which means we do things in a certain predefined sequence. There's specific order. So if you were building a highway, digging up the road, I'm no civil engineer, but civil engineers probably know that you have to maybe dig and then maybe put gravel. I don't know what they do, but then they compress it. I know you civil engineers are laughing at me at this point. That's okay. I'm not a civil engineer. And then they have to compress it, and they apply the tar, or I don't know what they do. But they do it in a certain sequence. Likewise, if you were building a house, there are, you start with the excavation, you do the foundation, and then you do some other stuff, and it's a systematic way of doing things. And that's the predictive way of managing projects. The adaptive approach, which is the agile way of managing projects, is change-based. So this means that you don't develop a full plan in advance. Instead, you work with a backlog of features or user stories or requirements that are prioritized by the product owner, who I just mentioned previously. The product owner decides which of these features or user stories are going to be most important for them to be done first. And then we do these in sprints, which is also called iterations. So sprints or iterations. And as we complete each sprint, which is 2 to 4 weeks long, we would have probably completed one of those features, and it gets tested. And if the product owner is happy with it, then we sit with the product owner and we review the backlog for all of the features that are yet to be done, and we decide what the next sprint or iteration will be about. We will be expanding on this later, but that's the idea. We don't have to develop a full plan as in a highway, but instead we put all of what we want on a list. It's like a shopping list. If you had to go shopping and you have a limited budget, you would put down on a list all the things that you would like. Some of them you know very well that you must buy, things like bread, milk, eggs, whatever. And some things are nice to have, like chocolate. If you have a good deal, maybe you'll get it, but it's not really essential. And there are things that you're not gonna get, which is, I don't know, something junk that your wife says or your spouse says you can't have, and so that will not be allowed. That will be crossed off the list. So when you go, if you have a limited budget, even from the things that you want to shop for, you're going to only shop for the things that you can afford within that budget. Now, if I want to convert that into agile project management, think of the budget that you go shopping with as the time that you have. Agile is heavily focused on time. So everything is time boxed. You do things in 1 to 4 week sprints, and you work in an expedited fashion. You try to complete as much as you can within the time that you are given. And so although we have a lot of things that we would like to see this app do, and for the sake of example, let's say it's the latest and greatest camera from Apple. Apple, includes camera and some other features within a phone. But let's say Apple decided to release, a state-of-the-art camera for those who are professionals in the field of photography, and they feel that this doesn't really fit in an iPhone, but this needs to be specialized equipment. So if they were developing this state-of-the-art camera for professionals, they're going to think about what would these professionals want, and what can we do now, and what can we hold off on, what is most important for us to get the product out there in front of our customers. And so the product owner will look through the features and decide which of these are going to go first, so that we can put the product in the customer's hands and get some feedback from them. The sooner we can get feedback, and this is how Agile thinks, which is the adaptive, the sooner we can get feedback from customers on the product, then what we do is we adapt to that feedback. And that's why it's called adaptive, right? And so now we may reprioritize some of the items that have been sitting in the backlog, and that's the sprint backlog. We will expand on this later, but key things here is traditional is plan-driven, where we plan everything in advance and follow that system. And adaptive, which is agile, is change-driven, which means that we decide the next sprint based on the feedback that we get from the previous sprint. Now, one thing to mention here also is that with the traditional, because we developed the plan all at the very beginning of the project, any change that would be required later on is disruptive. Nobody likes change in a traditional project. Because, think about it. If you were building a highway or road, you cannot uproot that highway that you already built. If you did the first mile, you can't undo the first mile because, the sponsor has a change. They want to change something about it. It's very hard to undo. And so changes are very disruptive when it comes to a traditional project. In the agile, it isn't. Change is okay. It's change driven. It's actually counting on change. If you have a new idea, you dream it up. I don't know, you're the product owner and you have a dream, or you're an important stakeholder and you saw something out there and you think that needs to be included in the product before we release it. Fine, no problem. Put it in the backlog, and once we finish our sprint, we'll sit with you, the product owner, us, the project team, will sit with you, and then we will prioritize all of these features or, the idea that you included. We call these user stories, okay? And the reason we call them user stories, it's because these are the requirements from the user's perspective. A user story represents some outcome or some feature or capability that a user of the system expects from it. And you may want to call it user story, you may want to call it a feature, you may want to call it function, or you can just call it a requirement. Okay, so these are what users want out of the system. They go in that backlog. So no problem adding anything into that backlog. There is no guarantee we're actually going to do it. It all depends on the priorities. If things change in the environment of our project, where now suddenly something becomes important because our competition has pushed out a new product, and we have to quickly react to it, then some of what may have been nice to have in our backlog would suddenly become a high priority item, could become the next sprint. So this is how Agile works. It is flexible. It is a faster way of getting results into customers' hands. And this is why most organizations are shifting to Agile. And this is why PMI introduced Agile into its project management. Another thing to mention is that in the Agile approach, we produce the project, or we complete the project in iterations, in increments. And we work with time-boxed cadence. So I just want you to know this term, time-boxed cadence, which is what they refer to the iterations or sprints as. Now, if you had studied that little tiny book that came with PMBOK 6, which was focused on Agile, there was an extra manual or standard that they included with the PMBOK 6. That one covered all of the terms that you needed to know for Agile. So in a way, the new exam includes PMBOK 6, that small Agile book that they included with PMBOK 6, and PMBOK 7.